The Winter of Whispers. The winter of 1692 fell upon Salem village like a shroud. Snow choked the lanes, and the wind, a bitter and constant preacher, howled around the saltbox houses, rattling windows and souls alike. Inside the parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, piety, and a creeping, unspoken boredom. It was a world of rigid prayer and silent dread, where the forest that pressed in on all sides was seen not as a thing of beauty, but as the devil's domain, a dark cathedral for his unholy rites. Within these walls, two young girls, the Reverend's 9-year-old daughter Betty and her 11-year-old cousin Abigail Williams, sought refuge from the suffocating stillness. They found their distraction in the kitchen, in the company of Tituba, Reverend Parris's slave from Barbados. Tituba's world was different. It was filled with the echoes of a sunnier, more mystical place, a place of charms, spells, and stories that danced on the edge of the forbidden. It began innocently enough, a game to divine the profession of their future husbands. Tituba, perhaps seeking to amuse the girls or simply to feel a sense of power in her powerless life, dropped an egg white into a glass of water. The girls huddled close, their breath misting in the cold air, as the albumen swirled and took shape. But the image that formed was not that of a farmer or a blacksmith. To their horrified eyes, it looked like a coffin. Fear, once planted in such fertile ground, grows with monstrous speed. The game was a sin, a secret pact with the unknown, and the guilt began to fester. Soon after, Betty Parris became afflicted. She would stand frozen in place, mute and unresponsive. Then, she would contort her body into impossible shapes, her back arching as if broken. She would crawl under furniture, barking like a dog, and scream as if invisible needles were pricking her skin. Abigail soon followed, her fits even more violent and dramatic. Panic seized the parsonage. Reverend Parris prayed, fasted, and called upon his congregation for help. But the girls' torments only worsened. Dr. William Griggs was summoned. He examined them thoroughly, his face growing grimmer with each failed remedy. In the end, he delivered a diagnosis that was both a relief and a terror. There was no medical explanation. The evil hand, he declared, was upon them. The word, witchcraft, was finally spoken aloud. It hung in the frigid air, a spark in a powder keg. The village, already on edge from political disputes, land squabbles, and the constant threat of attack from the frontier, needed a target for its anxiety. The pressure on the afflicted girls became immense. It was no longer a question of if they were bewitched, but by whom. Day and night, magistrates and ministers leaned over their beds, their voices urgent, demanding, "Who torments you? Who sends their specter to harm you? Name them." Betty and Abigail, trapped in a web of fear, guilt, and the terrifying attention of the adult world, finally broke. They whispered 3 names, the names of the powerless, the names of the reviled. The witch hunt had begun. The first accused were a perfect reflection of Salem's prejudices. There was Sarah Good, a destitute and foul-tempered beggar who muttered curses when denied charity. There was Sarah Osborne, a reclusive old woman who was challenging her own children's inheritance and hadn't attended church in over a year. And then there was Tituba, the slave, the foreigner, the storyteller. On the 1st of March, the 3 women were brought to the meeting house for a public examination before the magistrates. John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin. The room was packed, a sea of grim, expectant faces. The afflicted girls were placed at the front, and as soon as the accused entered, they erupted into a symphony of agony. They shrieked, convulsed, and claimed the specters of the 3 women were pinching, biting, and choking them in that very moment. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne vehemently denied the charges. "I am no more a witch than you or a wizard." Good spat at the magistrates, her defiance only hardening their suspicion. Osborne, frail and sick, could barely speak above a whisper, her protestations lost in the din of the girls' screams. But it was Tituba's testimony that turned the creeping fear into a galloping hysteria. Initially, she too denied everything, but she was a slave, alone and without protection. What happened between her initial denial and her later confession is lost to history. But one can imagine the pressure, the threats, the leading questions from Magistrate Hathorne. A man who believed in witches as fervently as he believed in God. When she finally spoke, the story that poured out of her was a masterpiece of terror. A dark tapestry woven from Puritan fears and her own fragmented folklore. She confessed. She told them she had signed the Devil's Book, which she said was red and as big as a history book. She described riding on a stick through the night to unholy Sabbaths. She spoke of a black dog, a red cat, and a tall, dark man from Boston who demanded she serve him. Crucially, she did not just confess for herself. When asked if others were in league with the devil, she answered yes. She said she had seen the spectral shapes of Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne tormenting the children. And then she added a chilling detail: there were others. 9 names were in the Devil's Book, she claimed, though she could not read them. Her confession was the confirmation everyone was looking for. It was not just a few outcasts, it was a conspiracy. The devil was truly at work in Salem, and his army was growing. The magistrates now had a framework, a narrative for evil. The gates of the dam had burst, and a flood of accusations was about to drown the colony. With Tituba's confession, the afflicted girls were transformed. No longer just victims, they became oracles of the unseen world, instruments of God's justice. Their power was absolute, their word, gospel. Their courtroom performances became more theatrical, their accusations more daring. The witch hunt widened its net, no longer content with catching beggars and outcasts. Now, it sought the souls of the pious. The first to fall was Martha Corey, a respectable, church-going woman whose only crime was to openly mock the trials and the girls' fits. Her skepticism was seen as proof of her guilt. If she was not a witch, why would she doubt their existence? In court, every move she made was mirrored by the girls. If she bit her lip, they screamed that she was biting them. If she shifted her feet, they writhed on the floor in agony. Next came Rebecca Nurse. She was 71 years old, a matriarch of a large and respected family, known throughout the colony for her charity and piety. Her accusation sent a shockwave through the community. Surely, not her. A petition was signed by dozens of her neighbors, attesting to her unimpeachable character. During her trial, the jury initially returned a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupted in an uproar. The afflicted girls howled and convulsed with such violence that the magistrates demanded the jury reconsider. Terrified, the foreman asked Rebecca Nurse to explain a statement she had made earlier. Hard of hearing and exhausted, she did not reply. Her silence was taken as a confession. The verdict was changed to guilty. She was hanged on Gallows Hill. The engine of this madness was spectral evidence. The court accepted as fact the claim that a witch could send their spirit, or specter, to torment victims in a different location, leaving their physical body behind. It was a perfect, diabolical weapon. There was no defense against it. How could one prove where their spirit had not been? John Proctor, a tavern keeper and outspoken critic of the proceedings, saw the trials for what they were, a fraud. "We must not believe them," he boomed. "They are lying whores." For his insolence, he and his pregnant wife, Elizabeth, were promptly accused. In court, his own servant, Mary Warren, turned on him, screaming that Proctor's specter was tormenting her, forcing her to touch the Devil's Book. Despite his furious denials, despite the lack of any tangible proof, John Proctor was condemned to die. The specter had become more real, and more powerful, than the person standing in the dock. Salem was a town eating itself alive, and no one was safe. Summer bled into autumn, and the shadow of Gallows Hill lengthened over Salem. The hangings had become a grim ritual, but the fever was beginning to show signs of breaking. The accusations grew more and more outlandish, pointing toward wealthy merchants, respected ministers, and even the wife of the governor himself. The elite of Massachusetts, who had been content to let the hysteria burn through the lower classes, now felt the heat on their own skin. Yet, for some, the end came too late. Giles Corey was an 81-year-old farmer, stubborn and cantankerous. When he was accused, he knew the court was a sham. He knew that if he stood trial, he would be convicted, and the law dictated that the property of a convicted witch would be forfeited to the state, leaving his children with nothing. He devised a desperate, defiant plan. When brought before the court, He refused to enter a plea. He would not say, guilty, or not guilty. He stood mute. Under the archaic English law still used in the colony, a defendant who refused a plea could not be tried. The punishment for this defiance was peine forte et dure, pressing. On September 19, Giles Corey was stripped naked and laid in a pit in an open field. A heavy wooden board was placed upon his chest. One by one, large stones were laid upon the board by the sheriff. The goal was to force a plea from his lips. The weight grew, crushing the air from his lungs, cracking his ribs. The magistrates pleaded with him. Enter a plea, they shouted. Confess and lie. Through cracked lips, Giles Corey spoke his final, legendary words. Not a plea, not a confession, but a demand. More weight. He rasped. He endured the torture for 2 days before his chest collapsed and his life was extinguished. He died unconvicted, and his farm passed to his sons. His death was a brutal, horrific turning point. It was a death so gruesome, so senseless, that it shocked even the most zealous prosecutors. Soon after, Governor Phipps, spurred on by influential ministers like Increase Mather, who finally declared it was better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be put to death, ordered a halt to the proceedings. He dissolved the special court and forbade the use of spectral evidence. The hysteria receded almost as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a wake of devastation. 20 innocent people were dead. Families were shattered, reputations destroyed, and a community was burdened with a guilt that would haunt it for centuries. In the years that followed, judges and jurors issued public apologies. Days of fasting and repentance were declared. But the ghosts of 1692 could not be so easily exorcised. The Salem Witch Trials became a permanent scar on the American psyche. A chilling, timeless lesson in how easily fear can turn to hatred, and how quickly a village, or a nation, can be consumed by the darkness within itself.